Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Symphony of Choices: How Mentorship Taught a Manager Decision-Making, Project Management, and Workplace Engagement, and Saved a Concert Season, by Gerald J. Leonard. Narrated by Bill Andrew Quinn. Publisher's Note: This audiobook has bonus material. Please contact whomever you purchased this audiobook from to request the material. All figures referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Limit of liability disclaimer of warranty. While the publisher and author have used their best efforts in preparing this book, they make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this book, and specifically disclaim any implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. No warranty may be created or extended by sales representatives or written sales materials. The advice and strategies contained herein may not be suitable for your situation. You should consult with a professional where appropriate. Further, listeners should be aware that websites listed in this work may have changed or disappeared between when this work was written and when it is heard. Neither the publisher nor authors shall be liable for any loss of profit or any other commercial damages, including but not limited to special, incidental, consequential, or other damages. Foreword by Antonio Nieto Rodriguez. Projects change the world. Projects make impossible dreams possible. The behavioral and social sciences endorse the idea that there are a few ways of working and collaborating that are particularly motivating and inspiring for people working on a project. These are that a project should have ambitious goals, a higher purpose, and a clear deadline. You have probably noticed that what people tend to remember most clearly from their entire careers are the projects they work on, often the successful ones, but also the failed ones. According to recent research, the number of individuals working in project-based roles will increase from 66 million in 2017 to 88 million, forecast 2027. And the value of economic activity worldwide that is project-oriented will grow from $12 trillion in 2013 to $20 trillion, forecast 2027. Those are millions of projects requiring millions of project managers per year. This is what I describe as the project economy, a term I conceived in 2018 when working on my earlier book, The Project Revolution: How to Succeed in a Project-Driven World. This silent disruption is impacting not only organizations but also the very nature of work and our entire professional lives. The traditional one-company career path of previous generations is now a distant memory. Today, people happily and fruitfully change jobs and employers a number of times during their careers. I believe that this trend will accelerate and that professional careers will become a sequence of projects. Another notable trend related to this is the growth in self-employment. They will be effective in managing a portfolio of projects. A global revolution. The more you look, the more projects you will see. On my desk, I have a bushel of examples. For example, in December 2016, the U.S. Senate unanimously approved the Program Management Improvement and Accountability Act, PMIAA, which will enhance accountability and best practices in project and program management throughout the U.S. federal government. The PMIAA will reform federal program management policy in three important ways: creating a formal job series and career path for program and project managers in the federal government, developing a standards-based program and project management policy across the federal government that recognizes the essential role of executive sponsorship and engagement by designating a senior executive in federal agencies to be responsible for program and project management policy and strategy, sharing knowledge of successful approaches to program and project management through an interagency council on program and project management. In the UK, on January 6, 2017, the Association for Project Management was awarded a Royal Charter. The receipt of a Royal Charter makes a significant achievement in the evolution of project management and will have positive implications for those who make and seek to make a career in this field. The Charter recognizes the project management profession, rewards the association that champions its cause, and provides opportunities for those who practice its disciplines. The Richards Group is the largest independently owned ad agency in the United States, with billings of $1.28 billion, revenue of $170 million, and more than 650 employees. Stan Richards, its founder and CEO, removed almost all of its management layers and job titles, leaving only that of project manager. In another example, in 2016, Nike was looking to fill a vacancy at its European headquarters. The job description was Corporate Strategy and Development Manager for the European, Middle East, and Africa (EMEA) region. Such a job would traditionally entail strategic planning, market analysis, and competitive intelligence competencies. To my surprise, instead the job was described as project management. This meant that Nike was looking for someone who could implement transversal and strategic projects for its strategy function. This was a clear shift of focus and culture, from planning and day-to-day activities to implementation and projects. And Nike is not alone. I have seen similar job descriptions for strategy functions at UPS, Amazon, and others. In the project economy, we are all project managers. For centuries, learning was achieved by memorizing hefty books and mountains of written material. Today, the leading educational systems, starting from an early age, apply the concept of teaching projects. Applying theories and experimenting through projects has proven to be a much better learning method, and soon it will become the norm. Not so long ago, professional careers were made in only one organization. Throughout the 20th century, most people worked for a single company. Today, we are likely to work for several companies, and at some point, we will most probably become self-employed, working primarily on projects. This sort of career is best approached as a set of projects in which we apply the lessons we have learned from previous jobs, companies, and industries, while developing ourselves for our next career move, often not known in advance. The emergence of projects as the economic engine of our times is silent, but incredibly disruptive and powerful. And this massive disruption is impacting not only the way organizations are managed. Every aspect of our lives is becoming a set of projects. A symphony of choices. Juggling multiple projects has become one of our major challenges, both as individuals as well as organizations in our private and in our professional lives. Gerald Leonard's book, A Symphony of Choices, is a timely resource full of practical tools and real examples that will help you build the knowledge and skills to thrive in a project-driven world. Following the inspiration from the best-selling book, The Goal, by Eliyahu Ngorot, Gerald tells us a business fable of a musician who was given the opportunity to become the personnel manager for the symphony he is playing with. From the first chapter of the book, the story manages to be both engaging and enlightening as it teaches us the principles of project portfolio management. There are fewer low-cost ways of working more inclusive, impactful, motivating, and inspiring than being part of a project with an ambitious goal, a higher purpose, and a clear, fixed deadline. Antonio Nieto Rodriguez. Preface. After writing my first two books, Culture is the Base and Workplace Jazz, I realized there was something missing. I provided guidelines for company cultures and high-performing agile teams, but I had not discussed how to manage projects and portfolios. I had created books around the people, and now I needed to consider the process of effective decision-making and project portfolio management, PPM. I began to dive into other books on the subject. While they had a lot of great information, charts, and technical information, they were essentially boring. They provided tools, but in a very stiff and institutional manner. I didn't want to do that. The world didn't need another tome that people wouldn't read and only stuck on their shelves to be seen by others on a Zoom call. This had to be different. something that captured the listener and brought them through the processes of effective decision-making and PPM without putting them to sleep. This book needed to create a story from which the listener could follow and learn. Then the pandemic hit, which meant I had more time to reflect on this issue, as people's normal everyday way of doing things was severely disrupted. People began working at home, and team meetings became virtual. People were forced to shift what they were doing, but they found themselves in difficult spots because they didn't have a plan. Projects went off the rails or were canceled because there was no mechanism for making the shift. It became overwhelming. In addition, new challenges and projects arose. Again, team leaders had to adapt to changing landscapes and find ways to get their teams to perform. New goals were established, but the process of achieving those goals became a hindrance. If you were used to having a morning meeting and then walking over to your teammate in the next office to ask a question, and all of that was taken away, how can you adapt? In addition, the way in which projects were handled changed. The analog way of things now was shifting to digital. As a consultant, even I had to adjust and meet these new challenges. The difference I observed between the companies that survived and those who didn't was how they handled making effective decisions and if they had PPM processes that were easy to follow. With a strong understanding and process in place, they could handle whatever challenges they encountered. They could easily pivot when it was called for and create new projects with confidence and ease. I had created an online program to teach PPM, which has been very successful. But how could I convert that knowledge into a book people would want to listen to? I fell back on the adage that authors know all too well. Write what you know. I know PPM not only from a consulting position, but from a practical one. I worked with a law firm and other large companies to create a PPM system that worked. I had those stories I could share. The second piece is my musical background. It is the story of my soul, and I have used it in my first 2 books to illustrate culture and agile project management in a successful manner. I still struggled with the last piece of the puzzle, the structure. How could I bring my life as a PPM expert and my life as a musician together into one cohesive story? I reread the book The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt and Jeff Cox. It is a business fable, and while it is over 20 years old, it still is engaging. Its purpose is to transform management thinking. I was onto something. I began thinking about a business fable, a story that would be both engaging and would teach the principles of PPM. It was time for me to dig deep into my own life and find the storyline. And so Jerry, the protagonist, was born. He is a musician who was given the opportunity to become the personnel manager for the symphony he is playing with. He becomes quickly overwhelmed and must figure out how to meet all the expectations of his job. In the background are serious marital problems as well as an injury. He finds he is juggling multiple balls, and he is about to drop all of them. He looks up his professor from college who taught business management. Dr. Carl Richardson agrees to help Jerry for the price of a cup of coffee. We follow Jerry's progress, and we learn directly from Dr. Richardson the steps of PPM. The lessons he teaches Jerry are drawn directly from my online course. I draw upon actual experiences in both my business life and my personal one. My goal is to demonstrate how these principles are applied even when there are challenges, such as a pandemic. Jerry's confidence builds, and eventually he is juggling only 1 or 2 balls, projects at a time, and he has developed a system of prioritization and execution. This isn't easy or perfect, and he has to adjust his strategies when they aren't working. I include parts of his personal life because this is the way in which we exist. We don't shut out our personal lives when we are engaged in business. He learns to use the lessons acquired from Dr. Richardson and begins applying them to his whole life. In the end, he is happier and more goal-oriented. He isn't merely reacting to emergencies. He is predicting where they can occur and mitigating them. This lowers his stress, boosts his confidence, and improves his newly minted career and his family. I hope you enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to receive your feedback and hear your stories about your journey. Chapter 1. The Right People and the Right Time. The orchestra was warming up and preparing for the season's last concert. I always liked the chaos of sound as people warmed up their instruments and practiced those passages and runs one last time before the performance. Mixed into the cacophony of musical instruments were the conversations of the audience. People caught up with old friends, talking about their lives and children. Some discussed their jobs or where they planned to go after the concert. Others sat silently, reading the conductor's notes about the evening's performance, including the history of the pieces and the composers who wrote them. It was a time of building anticipation until the moment the concert master rose from their seat and the orchestra and audience become silent, waiting for the first oboist to play their perfect tone for the rest of the orchestra to match. The lights dimmed, and the conductor waited a couple of moments before stepping out into the stage lights. He took a couple of deep breaths and wiped the sweat from his brow as he listened for his heartbeat. This beat would be his guide for crossing the stage to his podium. It was his baseline for the downbeat and every subsequent beat that came after. All of this was happening as I flipped through my music, making sure it was in order. I rosined my bow and checked that the peg was secure on the floor at my feet. The point had found its groove so that my instrument wouldn't slide from my hands during the performance. My mind should have been focused on the music and only the music, but I was distracted. I had just been notified at the afternoon stress rehearsal that I had been selected as the new orchestra manager. Up to the moment I heard, I didn't really feel I had a chance. I had been in the symphony for 20 years, and so I had the experience as a musician, and I had been on the orchestra committee, a group that spoke for the needs and wants of the symphony members. However, I wasn't sure that qualified me to be the orchestra manager. It was a paid position with specific responsibilities, and this coming year of all years was going to be challenging. I thought of a number of other symphony members who would have been qualified, or they could have been hired outside the symphony. The hiring committee decided that I was their first choice, not only because of my experience as a musician, but because I had a few ideas of changes I wanted to implement in the coming year. "We're so excited you are the new orchestra manager, Jerry," said Cindy Whitaker, the first bassoonist. "We loved your ideas about direct deposit for the musicians and upgrading our music distribution." "Thanks," I replied. I had a heavy feeling in my stomach. "I'm really shocked you chose me, but I hope to do my best." "We know you'll do great," replied Cindy. I thought about all I needed to do before the next season. The next season was the 100th anniversary of the symphony. No pressure at all. I had not seen the program layout for the season yet, but knowing our maestro, it was going to be over the top, not only musically, but logistically. The maestro loved large pieces with many musicians, and the symphony often had to rent instruments and hire extra musicians. I was sure this coming season would be no exception. Unfortunately, there wasn't any list of musicians to be passed on to me from the previous manager. I needed to create a database from scratch and add musicians as substitutes for concerts throughout the year. In addition, I needed to set up auditions for vacant contracted musicians for the following year as well. The summer was going to be a busy time, and I only hoped I had the skills needed to put it all together. One of the difficult parts of hiring musicians as substitutes is that I would hire them sight unseen or, in this case, sound unheard. I would have to get recommendations from other musicians for people to call. In some cases, I would call people the day before the first rehearsal if someone called in sick. How would I determine that they had the chops to play and that they were reliable enough to show up on time and be prepared? If the musician didn't show up or wasn't symphony caliber, I would be the one to answer for it, so I needed to figure it out, and fast. The maestro stepped onto the stage, and there was thunderous applause. The maestro held a hand to us to acknowledge us, and we stood. Well, at least those seated stood. The bass section was already standing. I mentally pushed all the distractions from my mind. It was time to be focused on the music and worry about managing later. The maestro raised his baton, and I prepared my bow for the first downbeat of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The baton lowered, and we were off to another magical live music experience, sure to have the patrons chattering for days to come. At intermission, my wife approached me with that look I had learned to dread. "I just heard from Sally that you got the position as orchestra manager," Laura said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Well, I just found out this afternoon," I replied. "I had to grab a quick sandwich and change before the concert. I'm sorry that I didn't have time to talk to you about it." "We talked about this, Jerry. I didn't think it was a good idea because the pay is low, and you don't have the time." As I remembered the conversation, it was Laura who told me it was not a good idea. The symphony provided me with such a wonderful opportunity to perform and express my creative talents that when someone nominated me for the position, I was honored. "But I do have time," I responded. "This would actually supplement my income, not take away from it." "What experience do you have managing a symphony? You are a musician, not a business person." She had a point there, but I had not had time to process what I needed to do to make up for my shortfall of experience. "Can we talk about this after the concert? I need to get back on the stage." "Can you turn down the position?" she asked. She wasn't letting it go. "I suppose I could, but I really don't want to. I really need to get on stage," I pleaded. Laura crossed her arms and snapped. "Fine." The most technical part of the concert was in the second half, and now I had my wife to contend with in addition to the pressure of figuring out what I needed to do as the orchestral manager. The orchestra members returned to their seats, just as they had at the beginning of the concert. They rosined their bows, warmed their instruments, and practiced tricky passages one last time before the performance. As the maestro took his position on the podium, a thought occurred to me. In college, I had taken some business classes, and there was a teacher, Carl Richardson, who had left an impression on me. In college, my focus had been on music performance and education, but I really got a lot out of his classes. He might be able to give me some advice on how I would manage the orchestra and all of the things I needed to accomplish this year. I made a mental note as the maestro raised his arms, ready to give the orchestra their downbeat. All eyes were locked on him, and everyone was holding their breath, including the audience. The baton in his hand reached upwards and then down, and the orchestra began to play. It was amazing how much control the conductor had over the orchestra. He decided the tempos and the volume. He gave people cues on when to come in. All of this was accomplished with his hands, arms, facial expressions, eye contact, and even his posture. He managed the music, and I thought as the music flowed before my eyes that I needed to be a conductor in my own right as the orchestra manager. The next day, I met with my old professor, Dr. Richardson. "I am so glad you could squeeze a lunch in with me," I said. "I am just a little overwhelmed with this new position I have, and I remembered you taught me about managing projects. I took notes, I promise. I just never knew I would need them." "I'm always glad to help out a former student," Dr. Richardson replied as he sipped his tea. "So you have plunged into the world of portfolio management." "Well, I got a position as the orchestra manager, although now I'm not sure it was the smartest move." "How so?" "I'm overwhelmed. I have so much to do, and there are these timelines I have to do them in. The former orchestra manager quit the symphony, so I feel like I'm starting from scratch." "Why did you say portfolio management?" I asked. "Because, from what you described, that is exactly what you're doing. Think of it like your concerts. You have this program you're performing. In that program are pieces of music you're going to play, and each of the pieces requires certain musicians to play them. You following me? I pulled out a small notebook and began taking notes. Yes, go on. Each of those are projects that you have to manage, the choice of the program, the choice of the music, and then getting that music, picking and hiring musicians. All of those are parts of portfolio management. Okay, I get you so far. Here's a diagram for you to keep that helps demonstrate the different levels of PPM, said Dr. Richardson as he passed a piece of paper to me. As you see, there are 3 levels, and you will be involved in each of them. Let's start off at the highest level, the portfolio management circle. Here you'll be dealing with the higher parts of the organization. In your case, it would be the board of directors, the orchestra conductor, the director of the symphony, and so on. You'll discuss the season, the programs, and any other projects you'll be doing with the symphony. Do you have new things you want to implement? I do want to fix the way the musicians get paid. Right now, it takes 2 signatures, and sometimes musicians have to wait for their checks to arrive in the mail. It's a real pain. So, at the portfolio management level, you might propose your changes and how you plan to roll them out. I want the symphony to move to direct deposit so the musicians can get paid on the date of the concert. Great. So once you propose that project and get it approved, you would move down to the next level of program management. You would have the blessing of the director and board to implement this new program, and you would then share that with the musicians. You would explain how that process would go and what you needed from them to make it happen. You would make sure that there was a connection between the musicians and the payroll. Okay, I'm following you so far, I admitted. Some of the pressure was beginning to release from my shoulders. Then this is followed by the project management level. This is where the magic happens. You're responsible for the deliverables and making sure everything works as it's supposed to. The musicians play the concert, and they have their money by the end of the day. You'll continue at this level for each concert, making sure the process goes smoothly, and you'll have to onboard new musicians into the system as they're hired. That totally makes sense, I said as I fastidiously made notes. That's just one project. As the orchestra manager, you'll be handling multiple projects at once. I know, that's what's overwhelming me, I admitted. You need to take time and prioritize. What projects need to be done first? Once you've done that, you need to figure out at what level you'll be beginning. If it's not a new project, but is one being handed to you to manage, then you may not need to begin at the portfolio level. Instead, you'd be at the program level and figure out what you need to know, have in place, and what resources you'll need. Then you can move to the project management level. Right now, it sounds like you have both new projects and ongoing projects you want to implement. My advice is to write each of them down, figure out a rough timeline for them, and begin figuring out what you'll need to begin managing them. I sipped my coffee. Perhaps I needed a spreadsheet, or maybe I could use some software to do it. Is there some sort of software I can use to manage all of this? I asked. Yes, there are all sorts of programs you could use, Dr. Richardson replied. But first, I think you need to dive deeper into what are the best practices of portfolio management. This will help you tremendously moving forward. Are there books or articles you might recommend? I asked. Sure. Here are a few articles and books that a friend of mine, Gerald, who's an expert in project portfolio management, shared with me. What is the difference between projects, programs, and portfolios? pmworld360.com/what-is-the-difference-between-projects-programs-and-portfolios/ 5 Secrets of Strategic Growth Using Portfolio Management Principles. pmworld360.com/5-secrets-of strategic growth using portfolio management principles. Forward.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?